On the 1st September 2022, I began walking 900 kilometers through northern Spain. I started alone with my hammock and my camera and was curious what I could learn on the way. Soon I got to know a lot of different people from all over the world and recognized a clear message. In this documentary I want to share my 32 days with you. So sit back and let me show you the magnificent scenery while telling you the story of an ingenious traveler looking for experience on a super long hike. Let's begin. On a Thursday morning I woke up and took a train from my hometown to the airport in Strasbourg. In the afternoon, the plane landed in Biarritz, where I took the bus to Irun, the town where the Camino del Norte starts. After walking over the French-Spanish border, I just needed to find a place to get the pilgrim's credential. I found out that I could get it at the police station, so the officer handed me my credencial de peregrino and I was good to go. While walking through the city, I realized that I was already lost, because I didn't see the shells on the ground anymore, which indicated the way. I didn't want to use any kind of travel guide. I preferred having to ask people for the direction and finding my own way. Finally, I asked the receptionist of an albergue where I needed to go. He didn't speak any English, but he stood up, went outside and pointed to a yellow arrow. Everything was clear now. It was already around 4 p.m, but motivated and hyped for the long adventure that waited for me, I started blindly following the arrows. After leaving the city while climbing through a forest on the first mountain, I thought it might have been a better idea if I went to a supermarket first, since I didn't have any food or water. After a while, I luckily found a water source and had a great view of the city. I drank like a camel and filled up my bottle. Then I noticed some people looking in my direction and I heard them saying something about water in French. Suddenly, I had a strange feeling. I walked around the source and ironically, there was a huge sign that said that the water wasn't drinkable. Well, that's a good start, I thought, while imagining myself having stomach cramps and diarrhea for the rest of the day. I continued without worrying, but stopped by a church just in case. I passed a lot of sheep and horses on the grassy green mountain. Then it was noticeably getting darker, and I asked myself where I should sleep that night. I decided to take a break, and after a breathing exercise, I watched the sun setting behind the thin layer of clouds. I set up my hammock in the forest that I came from, but I was a little worried about the weather. Hungry, thirsty and tired, I slowly fell asleep. Then I woke up, and it felt as if the sun was about to rise again, so I looked at my phone. 20 minutes past midnight was not the time I'd expected. I fell asleep again and was woken up by the rain. Since a big weakness of my shelter was not having a roof, I started to pack my things at 3:30 already. Surprisingly, I was in a very good mood, feeling free and motivated, especially after I found a yellow arrow again. Arriving in the next town, I had to wait for 2 hours to transfer Irun at 6:30. There was still no market open, so I continued to walk the remaining 11 kilometers to San Sebastián. I enjoyed the view of the coast and later stumbled across a sign that said Venta de Pan. Next to it, there was a gravel road leading to a house with burning light inside, and it smelled delicious. My stomach told me to go inside, so we went. That was where I stopped filming. I didn't want to be rude and hold my camera into the face of strangers. I'm sure that you're able to make your own nice visualization whenever you see the symbol. An old man with white hair, a white beard and a French accent welcomed me. His name was Israel and I felt a very peaceful presence when I looked into his eyes. He asked me if I was hungry and offered me to sit down at a table. The breakfast was already prepared. After asking him about the price, he said I could pay whatever I wanted to. Surprised, I sat down in this lovely warm living room, took a bite of the crispy marmalade bread, and drank of the fresh juice. While Israel was mopping the floor, He told me that he had traveled a lot in his life, and the most important part were the people, and learning from their perspectives. He also told me how the world nowadays lost something very important, because people thought too much with their head, and not with their heart. After asking him some more questions, he gave me something to read, a free paper from the 12 tribes, a spiritual community he and his wife were part of. Before I left, she gave me a map of the restaurant, called the Yellow Deli, and she told me about their farm outside of the city, where I could stay for the night. After saying goodbye and receiving a blessing, I continued my way with a new quest while walking through a forest. Then I saw San Sebastian from above. I passed the beach and followed the map. The restaurant was easy to find, and it had a similar vibe like the living room where I had eaten my breakfast. I drank a hot mate while talking to the barista that had financed his road trip through America by making music. Before leaving the cloudy San Sebastian, I went for a swim and finally visited a supermarket. I walked a few more hours and wasn't sure if I'd ever come across a farm Israel's wife told me about. I thought I had passed it already, so I just kept on walking. Later, I was on a street and a lady came towards me. She smiled and told me that I could take a break and eat something just 1 minute in the direction she came from. I saw the stand where a man welcomed me with a delicious tortilla. After having some conversation, he offered me a stamp. It was my first one. He took a piece of paper and glued it in my pilgrim's credential. It said, the Yellow Deli. So I found the farm. The man invited me to stay for the night. Today would be a special evening, the Sabbath, where the community sings, dances and eats together. I was too curious to reject. The man showed me my room, and at 6 p.m. he led my 2 fellow visitors and me to a different house, where the community gathered. He announced our visit, and they applauded. Then we sat down in a circle, and members were standing up and talking about their interpretation of different parts of the Bible, while 2 people were quietly translating into French and Spanish. I noticed the similarities in hairstyles and clothing for each man and woman. After a prayer, some members took their instruments and started playing some music, while the rest of them were singing and starting to dance together in the middle of the room. Then it was time for dinner, so we walked a few minutes up the road and stayed at the second restaurant, which was now closed for guests. Astonished by the love for detail that went into creating the building, a man called Haku offered me to sit with him and his wife. I sat down and talked with them while the food was brought to us. The 12 tribes were found in the US during the Jesus movement in the 70s, where many communities have emerged. Most of them are now gone, except this one, which can be found around the world. They follow the principles of love and compassion and live for one another. Haku was born in Israel's house and grew up in this community. He didn't go to school, but he was taught everything important at home. The members also didn't work for money, but all the income from the albergue and products was to maintain the community. They bake their own bread, grow their own vegetables, and kill their own animals in order to eat meat. I found out that they were only allowed to use cell phones for communication and computers only for work. They didn't use it to entertain themselves and didn't even listen to music which was not their own. His wife explained that they only want to be connected with their own pure spirit. After the dinner, it was time for some music again, and it didn't take long until I was part of the dancing circle, which was quite funny. The woman next to me explained what the song was about.
Is it there? What is it?
Haku offered me to stay for a few more days, but that was where I denied. I was very thankful to have met this community though. It was exciting to get a few insights about an alternative way of living in a group where everyone is accepted and belongs. I found their aesthetic lifestyle, following the less is more principle, very admirable and felt a calming and peaceful presence during my stay. I'm sure that it was caused by their strong belief and trust in God, which caused a powerful transformation for many people that joined the community. From self-interest, incompleteness and fear, to a life full of purpose, harmony and love. If you're interested, you can go on their website and read some of their experiences. Happily, I went to sleep and said farewell in the following morning. Full of energy after the breakfast, I continued my journey. Right after this recording, I met Mikel, a guy from Valencia. He taught me some basic words with a dialect from the region. For example, egunon, which is a polite way to say hello. We separated again in the next village, and I continued alone. But it felt more like skiing with the sticks that I had bought the day before. It was a big help using the strength of my arms as an additional drive. In retrospect, I could have simply looked for a nice wooden stick though. After walking on the coast, I took a break near some mountains. Later, I had a conversation with a group of German women we had seen us at Israel's albergue. They were looking forward to use the journey to think about and hopefully answer some personal questions about their lives. Later, I met a girl and her father from South America. The girl showed me a red edible flower that was delicious and tasted spicy. We walked to Deba together, where I went to the beach and relaxed. It felt amazing to float in the refreshing salt water and to lay down in the warm and soft sand after walking for the whole day. Then I went to a supermarket. I followed the Camino on top of a hill where I hoped to find a good spot to set up my hammock. And luckily, I did. I was eating and watching a series on Netflix, and after the second episode, I stopped and looked around the green forest. I had to think of Haku, who told me that for his entertainment, he simply went outside and watched God's creation. So I stopped and watched the birds while listening to the sound of the forest instead, until it slowly got dark. Then the noise from the city got louder. It was Saturday and there must have been a concert somewhere in the valley that played heavy metal until 3 a.m. While I was trying to fall asleep, I started to feel a second weakness of my setup, which was the cold. I imagined Spain much warmer during that time of the year, and my thin sleeping bag wasn't a big help. Anyway, I had a few hours of sleep in the embryonic position and got up just before sunrise. From walking uphill all the time, it got too hot, so I took a break at a viewpoint to change my clothes and to eat some of my remaining snacks. It was when I returned to the Camino at a water source where I met Junshan, Jingy, Ricky and Wolfgang. 3 people from Taiwan and 1 man from Austria. We talked and had a similar speed, so we just walked together. It was a tough but beautiful path that day. Finally, we arrived at a village where the others wanted to stay. I decided to join them in the albergue and spend the rest of the day with them. It was the first time for me sleeping in a public albergue, and I noticed that there were a few things which I didn't like so much about it. First of all, the smell. For me it was better only smelling myself, which after some time I stopped noticing anyway. The other thing were the noises. Not necessarily the snoring and moving in the beds, because usually that didn't bother me anymore after a long day of walking. It was more about the noise in the morning. Some people were very eager to get up as early as possible, and the following restlessness sometimes started at around 5:30. But of course, there were also very convincing pro-arguments, like having a proper toilet and shower, and obviously not having to worry about the rain or freezing to death during the night. The next morning, we started together and began the day with some German lessons.
Ich liebe dich.
Ich liebe dich. Liberty.
Liberté.
Liberty.
Liberté?
Liebe.
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 Liebe. And Liebe is love.
Liebe is love.
In exchange, they taught me how to count in Mandarin. Then we walked through a monastery where the pilgrims could also stay for the night. Later, Wolfgang noticed a few nice pear trees, so we had a great snack on our way. I realized that the late summer is quite a convenient time to walk the Camino, because there are all kinds of fruits that one can eat on the way. Pears, apples, figs, blackberries, and some fruits that Wolfgang showed us, which I can't remember the name of. After noticing that I had lost my hat, I used my scarf to protect myself from the burning sun and for the first time started to listen to some music, which felt great after not having listened to it for a few days. In the evening, I joined the group again in the hotel room, since the albergue was full. The day after was an ambitious day, because we wanted to reach Bilbao, which meant walking more than 37 kilometers. I left a little bit later from the hotel and thought that I would catch up the others. I climbed the first hill and walked under the warm sunshine. Soon I met Jingyi and Wolfgang. 3 days earlier, before I met the group, Jingyi didn't feel well while climbing a steep hill. That's where she met Wolfgang, who had helped her a lot and continued to walk with her and the rest of the group. I passed them, thinking that I would soon reach Jinshan and Ricky as well. It turned out that they took the wrong turn, which was the reason we didn't see each other. I listened to some podcasts and continued my walk through some more forests and small villages. Then I took a nice break just before Bilbao. In the afternoon I arrived. I thought of sleeping outside, but I kind of wanted to stay in the city and see the others again. So I went to a hostel. The rest of the group arrived a few hours later, and we met for dinner. They gave me the location of the next albergue, because the chances of us meeting again in the morning was quite low, since I didn't have any internet. Slowly I walked outside the city and met some non-human pilgrims. Some of them were a little bit bigger. In the afternoon, the Camino led me back to an urbanized area. Just before finally leaving the city, I met Joyce from the Netherlands, who used the journey to transition to a new chapter in her life, since she finished her studies. She told me that she had stayed a few days in Bilbao and that she would walk to Fisterra, a town on the west coast of Spain. It kind of made sense to me to stop at the west coast, the point where you really couldn't walk further, instead of just stopping in Santiago. Since I didn't have time pressure, I simply changed my final destination. Santiago was nothing but business anyway. We continued our way and finally walked next to the beach again. In the albergue, the others had arrived already and we returned to the beach to enjoy the waves and the warming sun. The next morning was beautiful. There were spectacular views of the coast, and I spent quite some time watching the rhythm of the waves crashing over the rocks and feeling a high motivation and gratefulness. Then later there was a decision to make. Either the short way on the coast or the official way, which was several kilometers longer. If I had known that the short way would lead to the highway, I would have chosen the other one. But at least I arrived much earlier in the beautiful Castro Odiales, where I went to the albergue with only 16 beds after some sightseeing. Surprisingly, the others and I were one of the first people to arrive there, so our beds were safe. I also met Mikael for my third day again, and he told me about some pain in his leg. I knew what to do, because giving massages was a daily ritual for Jing-Yi and her new student Wolfgang. Mikael was soon one of the first clients, and believe me, it was no pleasure for him. But the following days he felt much better. Not without reason, Jing-Yi's motto was, "Today hell, tomorrow heaven." We still had to wait 2 more hours until the albergue opened, and in that time, Jin-chan and me went to the beach. Somehow I felt as if I hadn't walked enough that day. But at the same time I realized that this feeling was only caused by my ego, as if I had to prove something to others or myself. We had an inspiring conversation in which we agreed that the Camino is a great metaphor for life. Arriving at the final destination a few days earlier or later wouldn't matter. It's only about the journey. It's only about appreciating and living the moment and making the best out of it. Of course I knew that before, but there I began to feel it more deeply. We had spent our night in an old monastery, where we had a great dinner together with a lot of people. After taking a ferry, I chose to walk on the beach and met the others later. At the second beach we stopped to take a swim and we played in the water like little children. It was not the last time we were acting like childs that day. The remaining distance to the next albergue was still far, and under the sun it was quite exhausting as well. But finally we arrived at the most beautiful and probably most famous albergue so far. I was relaxing in the sun when Mikael asked me if I wanted to try to climb on his shoulders. He took part in building some human towers, which are typical for Catalonia. After I nervously tried it, it was a turn of the others, who also were very excited to learn it.
I take off my video.
It's not heavy. It's not heavy.
You're standing?
He's looking
Somehow.
so happy.
Then one of the volunteers of the albergue rang the bell, and all the pilgrims gathered in a room, in which Ernesto, the host, held a speech about the history of this place and his family. In the past, he used to travel a lot, and he told us a story about one of his journeys where he visited a small village on top of a mountain. The people there didn't have a high education and visited universities, but they had a certain sense for community and love, which is mostly lost in society now. We should be more empathetic and help others in our daily lives, and we should step back from the egoistic way of living in which we are trying to reach fulfillment in the external world, with material things for example. It is easy to see the bad, but the good mostly stays hidden, he said. I stumbled across this message of selflessness and love quite often on the Camino, and began to think more deeply about it. I concluded that even though it can be a very long and difficult process, I should take a look inside, with honest self-observation and reflection, to recognize egoistic patterns and transform them into positive energy. In other words, realigning my inner compass to reduce suffering. Spending time alone is a good opportunity for that kind of practice. After the collective dinner, Ernesto told us some more stories in a smaller circle. It was nice to listen and watch the beautiful paintings before going to sleep while the full moon was shining. We made our way to the ferry station and had a great time in Santander, together with Adam and Francesco, one Slovak and one Italian guy from our albergue, with whom we were fooling around and enjoying the rest of the evening.
Thank you for your 2 kilometers.
But the next day was tough. We had walked almost 40 kilometers to Santia del Mar, and it was mostly on the road, through industrial areas. But we met some more nice people, like Oti and Pekka, a Finnish couple with whom I had enriching conversations about art. They both were musicians, and Pekka told me that I should follow my heart, and despite of the opinions of others, create what I want to, as long as I stay true to myself. Finally, we arrived in the old and touristic stone village. We had a cozy evening in the garden of the albergue, also with her father and his son from Germany. I started to walk a little bit later in the next morning, climbing the first few hills alone. I took the wrong turn and got lost, but it led me to a very beautiful scenery. After getting back on track, I flew over the Camino and soon caught up the others. Arriving in the city, I bought some snacks and took a break at the beach. It started to rain, so we stayed in a hotel together with Adam, our new companion. We were practicing some yoga on YouTube that Jingy had recommended us. It was nice to walk in a group of 6 from now on. It felt good getting to know more about the history of the people and their reasons behind the journey, building friendships and getting to know different perspectives. Israel's words about the importance of people still resonated with me. In the afternoon, we also met the Finnish couple again and continued our way together over the bridge and up the last steep hill to our albergue, in which many familiar faces welcomed us. One of my favorite days regarding the scenery waited for us. After walking on the road for a while, we arrived at the coast, which was mesmerizing. It was rainy, so we continued walking in our funny-looking rain jackets.
Snowman?
The snowman.
Tokyo, 4 years in Osaka. I think my roommate always cooks for me.
Some more astonishing cliffs waited for us, and geysers which only erupted in winter, but made bizarre noises during the rest of the year. We were in a good mood, the sun came out, and the Camino led us to a fascinating view. But it was very tough, and we made so many breaks that day that it was difficult to arrive at our destination before it got dark. But we did it, and took a last rewarding swim in the sea. In the following morning, we left in a mystic atmosphere, and while walking, we distracted ourselves by playing some memory and word games. We swam again when we arrived in the cold and windy Riba de Sella, where we had our dinner in the hotel room. The day after, we didn't walk so much and arrived quite early to spend time with some of the other pilgrims that we met almost every day. Soon there would be a decision to make, either continuing on the coast or going inland on the Camino Primitivo, which was supposed to be more mountainous. Only a few people wanted to choose the Primitivo, including me, so we took a last swim at the very windy beach of La Isla. The last sunrise at the coast was beautiful. After a few more hours, we met a lovely dog which didn't want to leave and followed us for a few kilometers. We were a little worried because he didn't want to return to his house, but finally the owner got him back and we continued to walk through a forest. In the albergue, it was nice that there was a kitchen, because we were cooking an amazing dinner together with plenty of people that I got to know better in the past weeks. The last dinner before splitting from the group, and without any funny reason, we laughed like maniacs in that night. Even bigger was the contrast saying goodbye in the next morning. But it also felt good. I wouldn't have imagined walking nearly 2 weeks with this group. I was surprised of how quickly I could bond with strangers and of how deep the new friendships felt. Even though I very much enjoyed spending time with them, I was also curious and looking forward to continue my journey alone on the Camino Primitivo. Walking alone was only the case for 1.5 days, because while leaving Oviedo in the afternoon, I met Andrew, a guy from the Czech Republic that I'd spoken with a few days earlier on the Camino del Norte. He slept outside for almost 2 weeks in a row, which I found fascinating, and that night I joined him, sleeping in my hammock again after 2 weeks. I was better protected against the cold this time, because I had bought a second sleeping bag. But finding a comfortable position in those 2 layers in the hammock felt as if I was a fly fighting for its life in a spider web. It was amusing to hear that Andrew accidentally stumbled across the Camino. He just wanted to go hiking near the coast of Santander and was surprised of how many other hikers there were until he found out. In the afternoon of the next day, his sister and her friend came to visit, so we were walking in a group of 4. After walking over a mountain and through a forest, we visited an abandoned monastery and decided to stay there for the night. A woman we met the evening before also joined us sleeping there. It was difficult to find a place to set up my hammock, but finally I found one, near the garbage. Anyway, the stars were beautiful that night. At 9 AM we woke up, which was way too late for what we wanted to walk that day. We chose a route over a big mountain with no cities on the way. We wanted to sleep in an albergue that night and didn't even start to climb the mountain when it was afternoon already. Taking so many breaks didn't make it better, but the scenery was simply too good. It was already slowly getting dark when the girls tried to hitchhike to the town because of how tiring it was. Andrew and I walked the rest and arrived at the albergue when it was dark. Luckily, the girls were successful and ate dinner already. Then, Margina from Kazakhstan joined us. I had met her a few days before at Jose Primitivo. It was nice to see a familiar face again, and the next morning we walked together. We started in the dark and made our way through the clouds. Beneath them there was a big lake and a dam that reminded me of Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings. In the albergue there was a lovely ambience, especially in the evening when people were playing the guitar and singing together. Until the host came back and threatened to throw us out if we didn't stop and go to bed in 2 minutes. That was surprising. But he couldn't stop us from playing cards in the toilet until midnight, which was super funny. The next morning, Andrew, his sister and her friend stayed together because the girls wanted to continue hitchhiking. So Margina and I walked alone that day. Shortly after entering the last reach in Galicia, we took a break on top of a hill, where we ate some of our snacks. The night was very cold, and the hands began to feel numb after starting to work early in the morning of the next day. After a while, we found the place where Andrew set up his tarp, and we helped him to dry it a little. Then we enjoyed the view of the town where we had stayed. We continued our way through the fog until we reached a nice sunny viewpoint. Finally, we arrived at the next albergue, where we sunbathed and cooked delicious vegetable soup, together with a guy from LA.
Da 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 da. Wow.
We said a final goodbye to Andrew, who went to look for a place to sleep. The next day, Margina and I walked to Lugo. We listened to some music and met another dog that also followed us. It was quite dangerous because he joined us on the road and he didn't have a leash. Finally, he got picked up by, hopefully, his owner that was looking for him on the road. Then we came closer to the city. The albergue was much bigger than the ones before because many people start their Camino in Lugo to walk the last 100 kilometers to Santiago. At 5:30 we woke up the next morning, ate our breakfast and started to walk a while in the dark. We had a big plan, 47 kilometers to the next albergue. Margina wanted to arrive earlier in Santiago to meet a friend from the Camino del Norte, and I didn't have anything against it, since I liked the challenge. Before 11 AM, we had already walked 20 kilometers. The weather conditions were great for that kind of distance. After a while, I felt very tired. But once I pushed through a certain level of pain though, I could just keep on going and nothing could have stopped me. I even seriously thought of walking straight to Santiago without sleeping, that's how overconfident I became. We arrived in the albergue with 150 beds, since there were also many people from the Camino Frances. It was after sitting down on the bed when I started to feel how sore my muscles were. I bought some magnesium in a pharmacy and just wanted to relax. But we still wanted to use the oven in the albergue to cook something. The preparation of the food took way too long, and it was late already. But instead of sleeping, I mixed all the ingredients over and over in my tiny plastic bowl to create some pizza breads. That was a test for my patience, but the absurdity of the situation caused a lot of laughing at least. In the end, we had way too much food and a Spanish couple helped us out. We also met a German woman that had lived in Britain for over 40 years. She was walking for nearly 2 months already and enjoyed every breath of her journey. The next morning, she told me that she admired our generation and how much she felt sorry for us because of all the things that her generation had messed up. She was hopeful and confident that we would make the world a better place. There were a lot more people walking from now on, and also more extraordinary characters, like a man that had went many caminos with his donkey and played his flute on the way in a forest.
Hey.
Coming closer to Santiago, the caminos led into each other. So we met the Finnish couple that had walked the Camino del Norte again. They were walking with Margina's friend, and together we planned to walk to Santiago the next day. And that day really felt like a mass migration.
I can't believe.
After a break on a hill, we approached the city, where the real madness started. The famous cathedral, in front of which crowds of people were standing, sitting, laying on the ground and celebrating as well as crying. I couldn't quite empathize with those strong emotions and the need to get an official certificate for the journey. But it also wasn't the end for me yet. So, after having dinner together and saying goodbye to Pekka, Oti, Magina and her friend, I continued my way to the west coast alone. I don't know what was going on, but I felt great. And people were very kind.
Muchas gracias.
A woman brought me some water, and a man gave me some grapes, which were a delicious snack on the way. And while it was slowly getting dark, I was confident and had trust that I'd find a good place to sleep. Even though sometimes there was little doubt, I tried to hold on to the feeling in my gut and walk to a small viewpoint. From up there, I saw a good opportunity. I left the road and entered the forest nearby. It was a perfect location to set up my hammock, and the sky was beautifully glowing pink when I went to sleep. It was so worth it following this feeling, which I was very happy about. It was bright when I woke up again, and I was surprised that it was already 9:30 when I started walking. I took a break at an old stone bridge that was built over a nice river, and a few moments later I met Anastasia, a charismatic teacher from Germany, who I had met 2 weeks earlier for the first time. I can remember that she once shared how much her emotions could change from doubting everything and asking what the hell she was doing on the Camino to being incredibly happy and grateful for life. Many others and myself absolutely agreed to that statement, and I felt that my emotions fluctuated less towards the end of my trip. I was sure that we'd meet again before arriving at the coast. Later, I met Yannick, a boy around my age with long hair who had traveled several Caminos before. He was fascinated by wood and carried a rare piece of about 1 kilogram in his backpack, which he wanted to bring home to carve something. Before dusk, he stayed in a hostel, and I continued alone again, while listening to some podcasts of Alan Watts and smelling the cow dung from the tiny villages around. After looking around for a while, I finally found a nice place to camp on top of a hill. It was cloudy when I fell asleep, and I prayed that it wouldn't rain. When I woke up in the middle of the night, the sky was crystal clear, and I've never seen the stars shining so brightly before. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a small dinosaur, and it was coming closer. Soon, there was another creature like that, which responded, and I didn't have a choice but to listen to that terrible concert. Finally, it stopped, and I fell asleep again. I noticed that it was getting brighter, so I turned around with the hope of seeing a nice sunrise. It was breathtaking. Before I got back on the Camino, my socks were already soaking wet because of the grass I had to walk through. So when I found a good spot in the sun, I took a break and tried to dry them. After a few minutes, I saw Magina walking towards me. She had walked a long distance to catch me up that quickly. She joined me and also had her breakfast. Then Anastasia approached us as well, and we continued. It's great how the Camino always brings people together. We just walked for a while and reflected a bit about our experiences and new insights.
Then I stood up and someone I met on the way in Del Norte, a man from...
After refreshing ourselves in a river, we said goodbye to Anastasia and were in an extraordinary good mood at the same time. That day, Magina and I wanted to finish our journey. It was almost 1 p.m, but we still had to walk 32 kilometers, and we definitely wanted to see the sunset, so we had to be quick. We agreed to split up and to meet again in Fisterra, the last station. I passed the decision point where one could also walk to Murcia and walk through the beautiful sunny scenery. I had ran out of water early and walked many kilometers without. Even more beautiful was it to finally find a water source. With music in my ears and euphoria, I walked through the last city and over a small mountain, until I saw a beach that I couldn't resist. I felt very light after the refreshing plunge in the salt water and began to walk the last 10 kilometers. It was after this recording when I recognized a familiar silhouette in the distance. Magina and I were walking the last few kilometers together again. We continued to Faro de Fisterra, where we wanted to see the sunset. It really felt like an end this time, sitting on top of the cliff and watching the last sun rays drop below the ocean. But the next day was just for relaxation. And in the afternoon we took the bus to Murcia and enjoyed the rough coast, which I could have watched for hours. Oti and Pekka also came to visit, and we spent some time together before Magina left to get her flight. I stayed to see the sunset and enjoyed the beach for the last time the following day. In the afternoon, I also took the bus to Santiago, where I visited the Taiwanese group and Wolfgang. We had a great dinner, also with a father and his son from Germany. The next day, I started to walk with them outside of the city, on the road where I had started to walk to Fisterra 3 days earlier.
Bye bye.
In the forest, I let them continue without me and said a final goodbye. My emotions were confused. Laughing and crying at the same time, I walked back, being grateful for the good people I met, the enriching experiences I made, and the lessons I learned. The day after, a plane brought me back home safely, visiting an old friend and returning to my lovely family. It felt as if I hadn't seen them for just a weekend. I had plenty of time to reflect my journey, and there were so many great things about it that I want to make a summary. First of all, the amount of time I spent outside, having contact with all kinds of people. Even though each person had their own different background and motivation, all of them had some kind of common ground. I can't remember one pilgrim that was unpleasant to spend time with. The people I met were open-minded, tolerant, and warm-hearted. In addition, I rarely used the internet and didn't use social media during that time, which I felt also contributed to a more positive mindset. Secondly, there was the potential for spiritual growth and self-improvement. During the daily life on the Camino, there were not so many distractions besides of walking. Thus, there was a lot of time in which the mind could wander around, thinking about all sorts of things. Just like in our normal daily life, in which we are often distracted from the present and end up worrying about unnecessary things. It was a good opportunity to practice bringing awareness into thoughts and emotions and trying to stay an observer. When the process of letting go was successful, The thoughts stopped, and the emotion then transformed into a peaceful state of calmness, in which the focus lies on the present moment again. Often, that state of flow occurred naturally for me after a long day of hiking. This can be a very spiritual and transformative experience, especially for people who struggle with negative feelings like guilt, regret, anger, or grief. The processing and settling of difficult events in the past, like divorces or even the loss of a loved one, was a very common reason why people went on the Camino. It doesn't surprise me when people say they found themselves on this kind of journey. The environment with few distractions and a contagious positive energy field by the people are a big contribution. But of course, you don't need to walk hundreds of kilometers to achieve that. You just need to find some time for yourself. Paradoxically, another benefit for me was the renounce of comfort, like daily hunger and physical exhaustion from walking and carrying a bag all day, which for me resulted in a natural and deep sleep with amazing dreams, as well as a greater appreciation and gratitude. Since suddenly, a meal, a shower, and a place to sleep had a much higher value than at home. This kind of comfort is what we often take for granted in our daily life. Even now, more than 2 months after my arrival, it is a good reminder to be grateful and humble. Towards the end of the Camino, I also felt a high motivation to fulfill more of my potential and learn as well as create more. Consistency is therefore the key. Taking one step at a time will take you far, even though sometimes it feels as if you don't make any progress. But while pursuing your goals, you may never forget what really matters: the journey itself, and spreading good energy and love to make the world a better place. I have to admit that I realized most of the things I just mentioned after my arrival, while reflecting in the post-production. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Consider sharing this video if you liked it, and see you in the next project. Buen Camino.
Gracias.